Hey, I'm Michael, and even though I grew up poor, I went to a school full of rich and spoiled kids. The worst part was being picked on by my classmate, Paul. He always asked me why I was walking to school instead of driving my own car. Of course, he knew my family didn't have enough money to buy me a car, but he simply enjoyed reminding me that his parents were richer than mine. Trust me, I hated Paul. But every time he made fun of me, I swore myself that someday I would be richer than him. The only question was, how? I wasn't the smartest person in the world, and frankly, I wasn't hardworking either. Well, after months of me trying to find an easy way to become rich, I had an idea. What if I would marry a rich and old widow? I mean, I was handsome and pretty good at talking to other people. I thought that every grandma would see me as a great catch. But where could I meet an old and rich widow? I was just some poor guy from New York. I decided to do some internet research, and bingo! I found dozens of articles about an old and widowed woman whose rich husbands had died a long time ago. I decided to go for one specific widow. Let's call her Elizabeth. She was 72, and her husband had been one of the wealthiest fashion designers in the world. Well, until he died of a heart attack. The only question was, how could I meet up with her? I decided to call her secretary, and I pretended to work for the New York Times. I asked if Elizabeth was interested in giving an interview about her deceased husband. The secretary said, Elizabeth doesn't do interviews, but she will attend a charity event inside the Hyatt Regency Hotel next week. You can try your luck and approach her there. Bingo! But then I learned that a ticket to the event cost $500. To be able to afford it, I had to beg my mom for 2 hours straight. I told her, if you give me those $500, I will pay you $500,000 back someday. When she finally gave me the money, she said, I don't have much more, so don't waste it. I thanked her 1,000 times and went on to buy the $500 ticket and rent a good suit for a day. When I arrived at the event, I was super nervous. I felt so out of place around those old and wealthy people. But then I saw Elizabeth. She didn't look very happy. She almost looked sad and bored. When she came back from the restroom, I took my chance and said hi to her. She was pleasantly surprised and said, Oh, sir, with whom do I have the pleasure of speaking with? I said, I'm Michael. My uncle invited me to this event, but I don't have anyone to talk to. She said, Oh, come sit at my table. Those people here are so boring anyway. Well, that's how it started. We talked for hours, and we were joking and laughing, and the sad old lady turned into a happy and energetic woman again. When the event reached its end, I said, If you ever want to meet again, I'll give you my phone number. She said, Of course, I'd love to spend time with someone as young and fun as you. Then, 3 days later, she invited me to her villa inside the Hamptons. Before I arrived, I checked the estimated value of her home on Zillow.com, and it said $40 million. Wow! But I told you, her husband had been one of the richest and most successful fashion designers in the world. So when I arrived, her butler picked me up and escorted me to Elizabeth. She was wearing a pink outfit and said, Oh, there you are. I'm so happy you took the time to visit me. I gotta admit, talking to her was a lot of fun. But nothing else happened. At least not on our first date. But on our second date, we had a little bit too much champagne and we kissed. I know, how gross. But the champagne made it easier for me, and of course, Elizabeth was on cloud 9. She was so happy to have a handsome and young guy like me as her lover. She also told me about her family. She said none of them visited her because all they did was party in Hollywood. She said they only waited for her to die and take her inheritance. I told her how sorry I felt for her, and she said, It's okay. You are a gentleman. You know how to treat a lady like me. That's where our love story started, and for the next 2 years, we spent all our time together traveling all over Europe, sleeping in the finest hotels, and always flying private jets. Everything was going well until her family found out she was dating me, a 20-year-old boy. They called Elizabeth and told her to break up with me, because according to them, I was only after her money. But Elizabeth was a smart woman. She perfectly knew that part of why I was her boyfriend was a luxurious life she was providing me, but her family didn't care that I made Elizabeth happy. They kept trying to destroy our relationship. Well, at least until Elizabeth broke off all contact with them. She was happy having me as her boyfriend, and that's all that mattered to her. And a week later, she came up to me and said, "Michael, let's get married." And of course, I said yes. I understand that people assume I only married her to get her money, but that's not true. I really liked her. But then, just 6 months into our marriage, she didn't wake up from her sleep. It was tragic, and the doctor suspected that she had accidentally taken the wrong pills the night before. But it didn't matter, because I was her husband at the time of her death, so I was legally entitled to her whole fortune. And trust me, it was a very big fortune. I thought about giving some part of the inheritance to her family, but all of them already had a few million on their bank account, and they had always treated Elizabeth like trash, so I decided to keep the money for myself. Of course, they tried to sue me, claiming I had killed Elizabeth, but none of their accusations had any truth to them, and in the end, I let my lawyers handle it. But of course, I hadn't forgotten why I had wanted to become rich in the first place. After I had received Elizabeth's money on my bank account, the first thing I did was buy a Bugatti Veyron Supersport for $2 million in cash. And then I drove it to Paul's house. You remember the guy that made fun of me in high school? I rang the bell at his parents' home to see if he was still living there. And indeed, he opened the door and looked very surprised to see me. He said, "Michael, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I just wanted to inform you that I have hundreds of times more money than your stupid parents. Just come, I want to show you my car." We walked to my car and Paul looked almost shocked. He said, "There is no way that's your car. You must have rented it." But I knew he would ask that question, so I opened the trunk where I had stored $5 million in cash. I said, "You think I rented these too?" Paul didn't respond. And then I went right in front of his face and said, "Now you know who's balling." And then I went into my car and just drove away. Since then, I've sent Paul a Christmas card of me next to one of my cars every single Christmas. Oh, and do you remember how I promised my mom to pay her $500,000 back for the $500 she gave me? Well, I gave her much, much more money because she really deserved it.